In a parking garage, I found my daughter with her baby in one bag. I asked, "What happened?" She said, "My father-in-law fired me. My husband changed the locks." I smiled. "Get in the car." It was time he found out who actually owned his empire. They left my daughter standing in a hospital parking garage with a 7-month-old on her hip and a duffel bag at her feet. No ride, no warning, just a text from my son-in-law that said the locks had been changed and she should figure something out. I was 2 blocks away when she called me. I could hear the baby fussing in the background and my daughter trying to hold herself together. That tight, controlled breathing she'd had since she was little, the kind that meant she was fighting hard not to fall apart. I told her to stay where she was. "Don't move. I'll be there in 3 minutes." My driver pulled into the garage before she even saw us coming. I was out of the car before he cut the engine. My daughter stood under a flickering overhead light, still in her scrubs from a 12-hour shift. My granddaughter pressed against her chest, one tiny fist curled around my daughter's collar. There was a cut on my daughter's lip, small, fresh. I didn't ask what happened. Not yet. I took the baby, buckled her into the car seat I always kept in the back, then I turned to my daughter, and I held her face in both hands the way I used to when she was small and the world had been cruel to her. "Get in the car, sweetheart." She didn't argue. That scared me more than anything. The drive to my house in River Oaks took 22 minutes. My daughter stared out the window the whole way. My granddaughter fell asleep before we left the garage, her little mouth soft, unaware. I didn't fill the silence with questions. I'd learned a long time ago that the first thing a person needs after something shatters is not conversation. It's safety. Everything else can wait. My housekeeper had the guest room ready by the time we arrived. I settled the baby in the portable crib, ran a bath for my daughter, laid out clean clothes on the bed. When I heard the water running, I walked downstairs to my study, poured 2 fingers of bourbon I didn't drink, and stood at the window looking out at the magnolia tree I planted the year I paid off this house 31 years ago. Just me and a law degree and more determination than anyone had the right to possess. My son-in-law's father thought he was a self-made man, thought the medical office complex he'd been running for the last 5 years was his own kingdom, thought his family name meant something in this city. He had no idea I'd been watching him since the day my daughter brought his son home for dinner. My daughter came downstairs an hour later in the oversized University of Houston sweatshirt she'd left here years ago. She looked younger in it, fragile in a way that made my chest ache. She sat across from me at the kitchen island and wrapped both hands around the mug of chamomile tea I'd made her, and she talked. It had started 2 weeks after the baby was born. Small things at first, comments about how my daughter folded laundry, how she held the baby, whether she was feeding her correctly. Her mother-in-law's voice growing louder in every room of the house they'd moved into, the house my son-in-law's father had offered them rent-free as a wedding gift. My daughter had been grateful. I had smiled and said nothing and made 3 phone calls the following Monday. Then came the job. My son-in-law's father had offered my daughter a position at Meridian Medical Group, the network of outpatient clinics he managed in the Houston metro area. Office manager, good salary. She'd been so proud, thought she'd earned it on her own. She had, because she was brilliant and organized and relentless. But I had also suggested her name to the hiring committee through channels so quiet she never would have known to trace them. I needed to see how they treated her when they thought no one powerful was watching. Turns out I'd seen enough. Last night, her mother-in-law had come to the house while my son-in-law was at work. There had been an argument about money, about a credit card my daughter hadn't opened, about purchases she hadn't made. Her mother-in-law had held up printed bank statements, circled items in red marker, accused my daughter of draining accounts that belonged to the family. My daughter had called my son-in-law. He'd come home, taken one look at the statements, and told my daughter to pack a bag. He hadn't asked her side. She said the cut on her lip was from a cabinet door. She said it with her eyes on the table, not on me. I didn't push. I stored that detail in the place where I kept the things that mattered. I waited until she was asleep. Then I called the man I'd relied on for 15 years. "Raymond," I said when he answered, "I need you to pull every financial record tied to Meridian Medical Group, every payroll account, every vendor contract, every line of credit they've drawn on in the last 3 years, and I need it in 48 hours. Done. Anything else? Whatever credit cards are showing up on my daughter's name that she didn't open, find them all." Understood. I hung up and stood at the window a long time. The magnolia was blooming, white flowers like small fists uncurling in the dark. Meridian Medical Group had been operating under the name of my son-in-law's father for 5 years. He believed he ran it. He'd restructured the staffing, renegotiated vendor contracts, expanded into 3 new locations, given interviews to Houston Business Journal about his vision for accessible healthcare and underserved communities. His photo was on the clinic walls. What he didn't know was that every lease for every one of those clinic locations was owned by a company called Garnet Holdings LLC, and Garnet Holdings was mine. Had been mine since I incorporated it in Delaware in 2016 through a trust managed by a firm in Austin with no visible connection to my name. I'd let him play owner. I'd let him believe he'd built something. I'd given him enough rope to show me exactly who he was, and for 4 years he'd behaved. Not generously, not kindly, but within the margins of what I considered tolerable for a man with his temperament and appetites. Then my daughter had a baby, and the margins had collapsed. Raymond arrived at my door at 7 o'clock the next morning. He carried a gray folder, slim, no label. He'd always been economical that way. He sat across from me in the study, set the folder on the desk, and looked at me without preamble. 3 credit cards, he said, all opened in your daughter's name over the last 18 months. Total balance across all 3, $47,000. Purchases include home renovation materials, luxury travel, and a significant amount of cash withdrawals from ATMs in the Galleria area. My daughter had never lived in the Galleria area. There's more, Raymond said. He slid a document across the desk. Meridian's payroll vendor was switched 8 months ago to a new processing company. I traced the ownership. The processing company is registered to your son-in-law's mother under a different last name. They were skimming payroll through my own company's bank accounts. I looked at the document for a long time. Outside, a cardinal landed on the Magnolia branch and then was gone. When did they start using her social security number for the credit applications? Raymond checked his notes. 4 months after the wedding. So this had been the plan, not opportunism, not panic. A plan built slowly and deliberately using my daughter's trust and her proximity and the house they'd put her in where they could watch her, isolate her, and bleed her dry without her ever suspecting the source. I closed the folder, set my hands flat on the desk, took one breath. Pull every overdraft line on Meridian's operating accounts, I said, effective today. Raymond's expression didn't change. That'll halt vendor payments within 72 hours. I know. And reach out to Dr. Patricia Wells, the medical director. Quietly, tell her there's a compliance review underway and she should expect contact from Garnet Holdings directly. He nodded. And the payroll processing company? Terminate the contract today. Cite vendor fraud. The language is in the original services agreement, Clause 11, subsection B. I wrote that clause myself. He picked up the folder. You anticipated this? I hoped I was wrong, I said. I wasn't. After Raymond left, I went upstairs to check on my granddaughter. She was awake, lying on her back in the crib, holding her own feet, completely delighted with herself. I reached down and let her grab my finger. Her grip was fierce for someone so small. Good morning, I told her. She made a sound that meant everything and nothing. My daughter appeared in the doorway still holding her tea mug. She watched us for a moment. Mom, she said quietly, he called this morning. My son-in-law. He wants to talk about custody arrangements. Already? He said his parents have an attorney. I looked at my granddaughter, who had found something fascinating about my thumbnail and was studying it with profound concentration. So do we, I said. My attorney had been waiting for my call since 6 o'clock that morning. Caroline Rhodes was 58, wore her silver hair cropped close, and had never once in 30 years of family law allowed herself to be surprised. I'd mentored her 20 years ago when she was a second-year associate at the firm where I'd made partner. She knew exactly how I thought. She arrived at noon, sat at my kitchen island with her yellow legal pad, and listened to my daughter tell her everything from the beginning. Every comment, every restriction, every night my son-in-law had come home smelling like a story that didn't add up, every time her mother-in-law had appeared uninvited and stayed too long. Caroline wrote it all down without interrupting. Then she looked at me. The credit cards? Documented, I said. 47,000, opened without consent. The payroll skimming? 3 years of records. Caroline made a note. Physical altercation? My daughter's jaw tightened. I fell into a cabinet. Caroline's pen paused over the pad. She looked at my daughter with a kind of patience that doesn't ask twice. A moment passed. He grabbed my arm, my daughter said, to stop me from leaving. My face hit the corner of the cabinet door. Caroline wrote that down, too. Then she set her pen down and looked at both of us. I need you to understand something, she said to my daughter. What's been done to you isn't just emotionally damaging, it's criminal. Identity theft, financial fraud, domestic assault. We can pursue criminal charges, civil judgments, and a protective order simultaneously. She glanced at me. How much do you want them to feel this? I looked at my daughter. She had both hands around her mug again, and she was staring at the table, the way she had the night before. But something had shifted. Her shoulders weren't curled anymore. All of it, my daughter said. Caroline picked her pen back up. Let's start with the protective order. Raymond called me 2 days later from outside the Meridian Medical Group offices on Westheimer. He kept his voice level the way he always did when things were moving fast. The vendor rejection hit this morning, he said. Payroll was due yesterday. It didn't process. I could hear the city behind him. His response? Raymond paused. He's been on the phone since 9 o'clock. The building manager called twice about the lease renewal. I believe your son-in-law's father has just realized that Garnet Holdings exists and that someone has an opinion about how he's been operating. Has he made the connection yet? Not yet. He's demanding to speak to the owner of Garnet Holdings. He told the building manager, and I'm quoting from the voicemail, that he has friends in this city who will make things very difficult for whoever is behind this. I smiled. Tell the building manager no comment at this time. Standard procedure. Compliance review in progress. Raymond made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I'll relay the message. That evening I got a phone call I'd been expecting. Not from my son-in-law's father, from my son-in-law. He was smooth, I'll give him that. He had his father's voice, that particular register that men use when they want to appear reasonable while delivering a threat. He told me he thought this situation had gotten out of hand, that he missed my daughter and the baby, that his parents were emotional people sometimes, and things had been said that shouldn't have been said. He was sorry she'd been upset. He thought maybe if I stepped back and let the family handle this privately, there was a path forward that didn't require attorneys and courts and whatever was happening to his father's business accounts. Then he said, my father has a lot of relationships in Houston, real estate relationships, property relationships. A lot of people know who you are, Eleanor. It would be a shame if things got complicated for you professionally. I held the phone and looked out at the magnolia tree. I appreciate you calling, I said. I truly do. A pause. You'll be hearing from my attorney, I added. Have a good evening? I hung up, pulled up my notes app and typed the time, the date, and a 3-sentence summary of the conversation. Then I forwarded it to Caroline. She replied in under a minute. That's coercion. Beautiful. Thank you. Raymond found her 4 days later. He set the file on my desk the way he always did, without theater. Inside was a single photograph. A woman in her late 30s, natural hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, standing outside what looked like a coffee shop in Midtown. Her name was Denise. She'd worked as the billing administrator at the original Meridian location on Kirby Drive for 3 years. She'd been fired 18 months ago after my son-in-law's father accused her of mishandling patient account data. What actually happened? I asked. She found the discrepancy in the payroll vendor accounts, Raymond said. She flagged it internally. 2 weeks later she was terminated for cause. The documentation used to fire her had errors in the dates and record numbers. Looks like it was assembled after the fact. She filed a complaint? With the Texas Medical Board. It was reviewed and dismissed. He'd submitted a letter of response from Meridian's attorney that disputed every detail of her account. I studied the photograph. Denise looked like someone who had decided to stop being surprised by people and was still adjusting to that decision. Does she know what was really going on? Raymond shook his head. She knows something was wrong. She doesn't know the full picture. Set up a meeting, I said. Today, if possible. Don't tell her who wants to see her. Just tell her it's about Meridian. He looked at me. She may not come. Tell her the person who owns the Kirby Drive building wants to have a conversation. He paused. She'll come. She arrived at my house at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in a gray blazer and flats, carrying a canvas tote that said I'd rather be reading, which told me everything I needed to know about her. She sat across from me in the living room and didn't fidget. She looked at me the way people look at someone they're deciding whether to trust, measuring, careful, willing to be surprised but not counting on it. I'm going to tell you something, I said, and then I'm going to ask you to tell me what you know. Is that all right? She nodded once. I told her about Garnet Holdings, about the payroll vendor, about the credit cards in my daughter's name. I watched her face as the pieces connected, watched her expression move from careful to still to something quiet and decisive. When I finished, she set down her tea and looked at the floor for a moment. The discrepancy I found was $52,000 over 14 months, she said. Pulled from the patient refund account. Small amounts, irregular intervals. I flagged it because the vendor processing code didn't match any contract in our system. When I asked about it, I was told it was a legacy account from an acquisition and not to worry about it. Who told you that? His son, she said. My son-in-law. He was in the billing office at the time. He had access, she said. He came in twice a week, said he was helping his father with expansion planning. She looked up at me. I should have pushed harder. You did exactly what you should have done, I said. They were the ones who chose to destroy your reputation for it. Denise was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you need from me? Your documentation. Everything you saved before they locked you out of the system. Everything you filed with the medical board. She reached into the canvas tote and pulled out a manila envelope. I've been holding on to this for 18 months, she said. Waiting for the right person to show up. I took the envelope. Inside, her evidence was meticulous. Time-stamped screenshots, printed ledger discrepancies, a copy of her internal complaint with every signature and date. The kind of documentation that comes from someone who knew from the beginning that she might need it someday. I looked at her. How would you like to come back to work at Meridian? Her expression shifted. You're serious? The current management won't be in place much longer. The medical director is excellent and deserves proper support. Your position would be reinstated with back pay for 18 months. Denise looked at me for a long moment. Then she almost smiled. I'd like that very much. 3 weeks after I found my daughter in that parking garage, I attended the Houston Healthcare Innovation Awards at the Houstonian Hotel. My son-in-law's father was receiving the Community Impact Award, an honor selected by a committee that had, up until 72 hours ago, had no reason to reconsider their choice. The gala chairwoman was someone I'd known for 12 years. I'd sent her a brief note the morning before. Don't cancel the award presentation. Let the evening proceed as planned. She'd called me back immediately. Eleanor, what are you planning? I told her the outline. There was a long silence. Then she said, I'll make sure the AV team gives your technician full access to the presentation system. My daughter didn't attend. I hadn't wanted her there. This wasn't hers to carry. She was at my house with the baby. With Caroline reviewing final protective order paperwork, and with Denise, who had become in the span of 1 week something closer to a friend. I arrived at the Houstonian at 6:45 in a charcoal blazer and good earrings, carrying nothing but a small clutch and a USB drive that Raymond had handed me that morning. He'd been thorough. He was always thorough. The ballroom held 200 people. Houston's medical community, philanthropists, hospital executives, the kind of people who assumed that power announced itself loudly and moved in the center of rooms. I found a seat near the back. Raymond stood near the service entrance in a dark jacket that made him invisible in every crowd. My son-in-law's father stood at the front of the room, working his way through conversations with the ease of a man who believed the world had been built to accommodate him. He wore a charcoal suit with a pocket square. He was laughing too loud at someone else's joke, the performance of a man whose credit lines had been frozen for 3 weeks and who had not yet found a way to stop the bleeding. His son sat 2 tables from the stage. My son-in-law. He dressed well for this. He looked, from a distance, like exactly what he'd spent years presenting himself as, a young professional, a devoted son, a reasonable man. I watched them both and felt nothing except clarity. The program began at 7:30. 3 awards, brief remarks, the usual architecture of evenings. My son-in-law's father's award was last. The MC read his name with warmth, mentioned the Kirby Drive Clinic, the 3 new locations, the partnerships with local school health programs. My son-in-law's father walked to the podium smiling, accepted the Crystal Award, set it on the lectern, and looked out at the room. "I've built everything I have," he said, "on 2 things, service and integrity." He paused for effect. In healthcare, those words can't just be values on a wall. They have to be the foundation of every single decision. I sent Raymond a single text. Now, the ballroom lights didn't dim dramatically. They simply shifted the way they do for a presentation. The projection screen behind my son-in-law's father came to life. He glanced at it without concern. He was expecting a slide deck about Meridian's growth metrics. That was what the program had told him. What appeared instead was a spreadsheet, clean, organized, clearly formatted. 14 months of payroll vendor transactions, each line color-coded. Legitimate entries in white, fraudulent diversion entries in red. There were a lot of red lines. A murmur moved through the crowd. My son-in-law's father turned and looked at the screen. His expression didn't shift immediately. The smile stayed on his face for 2 or 3 seconds after his brain had registered that something was wrong. The screen changed. 3 credit card applications. My daughter's name, my daughter's signature. A forensic analysis note in the corner. All signatures confirmed fraudulent. Somewhere near the front, a woman said, "Oh my God," quietly, like she hadn't meant to say it aloud. My son-in-law's father reached for the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, there seems to be a technical issue. If we could just take a brief recess to sort out." His audio cut. Raymond's technician at the console had simply removed his microphone from the system. He tapped it. He shook it. He looked toward the back of the room and couldn't find the face he was looking for. The screen kept playing. Security footage now. The Kirby Drive Clinic, a back office, a timestamp from 11 months ago. My son-in-law at the administrative computer. A vendor account being accessed. A routing number changed. The image was clear enough to read the monitor. The ballroom was very quiet. Then the voicemail. My son-in-law's voice came through the room's speakers, calm and deliberate. "I believe you heard it, Eleanor," he said in the recording. "A lot of people know who you are. It would be a shame if things got complicated for you professionally." Then my voice. "I appreciate you calling. I truly do." 200 people in evening wear, perfectly silent. Denise stood from her seat in the middle of the room. She'd come after all. I hadn't asked her to. She decided that herself. She walked to the stage the way someone walks when they've been waiting 18 months for the ground to stop moving under them. She climbed the stairs, stood at the podium, and adjusted the microphone that was still live because it wasn't the one my son-in-law's father had been using. "My name is Denise," she said. "I was the billing administrator at Meridian Medical Group on Kirby Drive until I found something that wasn't supposed to be found." She looked at my son-in-law's father across the stage. "I lost my job for it. I lost 18 months of my career. I was told I was incompetent. I was told I had mishandled patient data." She held up the manila envelope, the one she'd been carrying for 18 months. "I want you to know I saved everything." She set the envelope on the podium. My son-in-law had risen from his table. He was moving toward the service exit. 2 men I'd hired from a private security firm stepped into his path before he reached the door. Not physically aggressive, just present, solid, immovable. He looked at them and seemed to calculate something, and then he stopped. Caroline entered from the main doors with a woman from the Harris County DA's office, whom she'd been in contact with for 10 days. 2 officers followed them. The crowd parted without being asked. I stood and walked to the stage. 360 degrees of attention followed me to the front of the room. I didn't rush. I climbed the stairs and stood beside Denise and looked out at 200 faces that were, for the first time all evening, completely awake. "My name is Eleanor Hartwell," I said. "Most of you know me. For those who don't, I'm the founder of Garnet Holdings LLC, which is the company that owns every lease for every Meridian Medical Group location in Houston." A sound moved through the room. "I've owned those properties since 2016, I said, "and I've been watching what was being done with them." I kept my voice even. "I watched a man use my company's resources to fraudulently open credit cards in my daughter's name. I watched his son use administrative access at my clinic to redirect payroll funds into a shell account they controlled. I watched them fire a good employee to keep her quiet. And I watched them use my daughter's trust, her home, her sense of reality as instruments. I paused. Let the silence be what it was. What you've seen tonight is documentation, every record, every transaction, every forged signature. I didn't build this presentation to embarrass anyone. I looked at my son-in-law's father, who stood at the side of the stage still holding the crystal award that no longer meant what he thought it meant when he walked in. I built it because silence protects predators, and I have no interest in protecting predators. Caroline and the officer from the DA's office reached the base of the stage stairs. My son-in-law's father watched them come. His face had gone through several expressions in the last 10 minutes, and had settled somewhere between rage and a recognition that none of the usual exits were available. He was still holding the award when the officer asked him to step down from the stage. My daughter was asleep when I got home. The baby was asleep. The house was quiet in that particular way houses are when the right people are inside them. I stood in the kitchen for a long time drinking a glass of water, listening to nothing. In the weeks that followed, the Harris County DA's office filed charges: identity theft, wire fraud, embezzlement, domestic assault. After my daughter gave her statement, the case moved with a speed that surprised the reporters who covered it, though it didn't surprise Caroline, who told me early on that cases with this level of documentation tended to clarify judges' calendars considerably. My son-in-law's father was sentenced to 14 years. My son-in-law received 8, reduced for cooperation, though what he'd cooperated about was his father's money laundering connections, which had turned the case from a family matter into a federal one. My daughter stood in the hallway of the courthouse afterward, the baby on her hip, and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in a long time. Not happiness, exactly. Something older and quieter than happiness. Relief, maybe. Or the particular feeling of ground solidifying under feet that had been expecting it to give way. She said, "I should have called you sooner." I took the baby from her, shifted her onto my hip the way I used to do with her mother. "You called me when you were ready," I said. "That's all that matters." Denise came back to Meridian the following month. Her first act in her reinstated role was to implement a new vendor management protocol she'd been drafting for 18 months in her head while she waited. Dr. Patricia Wells, the medical director, sent me a handwritten note thanking me for what she called, in her careful way, the restoration of institutional integrity. I put the note in the drawer where I kept things that mattered. 3 months after the parking garage, I drove to my daughter's new apartment in Montrose, a neighborhood she'd chosen herself. 2 bedrooms, 2nd floor, windows that faced east, so the morning light came in clean and early. I brought groceries and a wooden toy I'd found at a craft market, one of those small painted birds that rocks back and forth when you touch it. My granddaughter was sitting on a quilt in the living room, surrounded by soft blocks, investigating each one with the systematic focus of someone conducting a scientific review. She looked up when she heard my voice and made a sound that could only be described as joyful and held up both arms. I sat down on the quilt beside her, picked up one of the blocks. My daughter came in from the kitchen drying her hands on a dish towel, and she stopped in the doorway watching us, and she smiled. Not a careful smile. Not a smile that was holding something back. Just a smile. "I've been thinking about going back to school," she said. "Oh? Nurse practitioner program. There's one at UT Health that starts in the fall." I handed the block to my granddaughter. "I think that's a wonderful idea." My daughter leaned against the door frame. "Mom," she said, "do you think things will actually be okay?" I looked at my granddaughter, who had decided the block was less interesting than my bracelet and was reaching for it with both hands, absolutely certain that what she wanted was reachable. That conviction children have before the world teaches them otherwise, before someone tells them to make themselves smaller, before someone decides their trust is a resource to extract. "Things will be more than okay," I said. "But not because the bad is gone, because you know something now that you didn't know before. You know what you survived, and that's a kind of knowledge nothing can take from you." My granddaughter got the bracelet. She held it up to the light the way babies do, examining it, turning it, delighted by the way it caught the sun coming through those east-facing windows. Her face was full of wonder. The uncomplicated, abundant wonder of someone who has not yet learned to be afraid of beautiful things. I watched her and I thought about everything I'd built, the company, the properties, the carefully constructed layers of protection I'd assembled over decades because I'd learned early that love without structure is only hope and hope is not enough. You have to build things, foundations, agreements, contingencies. You have to do the quiet work before the crisis, in the ordinary mornings when nothing appears to be wrong, because the morning when everything is wrong comes without announcement. I hadn't built all of it for myself. I'd built it for this, for a quilt on a living room floor, for a little girl turning a bracelet in the morning light, for a daughter who was already reaching for the next thing. Before I left that afternoon, I stopped at the door and turned back to my daughter, who was on the floor now, too, helping with the blocks, building a tower my granddaughter would knock down immediately and find hilarious. She said, "Don't go yet," without looking up. So, I set my bag down by the door, took off my coat, sat back down on the quilt. The tower went up, the tower came down. My granddaughter shrieked with delight every single time. We built it over and over again, the three of us, until the afternoon light moved across the floor and the baby grew drowsy and the room went warm and quiet and good. Later, I will tell you this. I've been asked what I would do differently, whether I regret the years I spent watching, waiting, gathering information, building protections my daughter didn't know she had, whether it would have been better to act sooner, to warn her more directly, to force the conversation before a parking garage and a cut lip and a 7-month-old with nowhere to go. I've thought about that question carefully, and here is what I know. You cannot love someone into safety before they are ready to see the danger. You can only be ready when they are. You can only make sure that when they finally reach for you, there is something solid there to hold. My daughter is enrolled in the nurse practitioner program. She starts in September. Denise is running the billing department at Meridian with a team she built from scratch and a vendor management system that has become the model the board is using for all 4 locations. My granddaughter took her first steps on a Tuesday morning between the couch and my daughter's outstretched hands. 7 small deliberate steps, completely unafraid. I watched it on a video my daughter sent at 7 o'clock in the morning. I watched it 4 times. Then I got up, made my coffee and looked out at the magnolia tree, which was blooming again, white and full, the way it does every spring, whether the year has been hard or gentle, whether the people watching have earned it or simply survived long enough to see it. Some things return regardless. That is not luck. That is just the nature of roots. If this story reached you today, hear me. I'm talking to you directly now, not about revenge, not about power, about watching, about paying attention to the people you love, about asking the questions that feel too hard because you're afraid of what the answer might require from you. Ask them. Do it now before they're standing under a flickering light with everything they own in one bag and a baby who doesn't understand why she's being rushed. Build your foundations quietly. Love loudly. And when someone in your family calls you and says, "I don't know what to do," make sure your first answer is always the same. Stay where you are. I'm coming.